The wooden box sat open on the glass counter, and I watched Elias Whitfield lift the magnifying loupe to his eye, his hand steady in the particular way a craftsman's hands stay steady even after decades away from daily bench work. "This is quite a collection," he said, examining the first tool, an engraving burin worn smooth along the handle from decades of use. "Where did you say this came from?" "My grandfather-in-law's old things," Vanessa said, her voice bright and pleasant, the tone of a woman confident she was handling a simple transaction. "He doesn't really use them anymore. His hands aren't what they used to be, and honestly, they're just taking up space in the garage." I stood a few feet back, near the shop's entrance, watching Elias turn the tool over slowly under the light, his expression shifting from professional interest to something else entirely, a stillness I recognized immediately, because I'd worn that same expression myself countless times over 45 years, the particular focus of a craftsman who has just noticed something that shouldn't be possible. He set the burin down carefully and picked up the loupe again, this time examining the handle more closely, tilting it toward the light from the shop window. "There's a mark here," he said slowly, very small, worn but still visible, a stylized W inside a small diamond shape. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly, uncertainty creeping into her expression for the first time since we'd walked in. "Is that important?" Elias looked up, and his eyes found mine across the shop, recognition dawning slowly, the particular recognition of a man reaching back 45 years into a memory he hadn't expected to need again. "That mark," he said quietly, "belonged to my father's workshop. Every tool that left his bench carried it." He set the loupe down on the counter, his gaze still fixed on me. "I think," he said, "you're going to need to tell me exactly how you came to be selling tools that came out of Elias Whitfield Sr.'s workshop 60 years ago. If you found this story tonight, I'm glad you did. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It helps more than you'd think to know real people are on the other end of this." A brief note before I continue. This story blends fiction with purpose, crafted for entertainment and the lessons worth carrying home. Names and details are coincidental. What you take away from it, though, is entirely yours to keep. I want to tell you something before I tell you everything else. There's a version of what happened in that shop Vanessa might tell people, if she tells it at all. In her version, I imagine, she's a woman simply trying to be practical, clearing out old belongings that weren't being used, doing what she believed was a reasonable thing given everyone's changing circumstances. I understand, in some ways, why that version might feel true to her, even now. I can only tell you what I know, the way I've spent 45 years examining things carefully before deciding what they actually are, not what they appear to be at first glance, but what the details, closely inspected, actually reveal. My name is Bernard Kessler. Most people call me Bernie. I'm 74 years old. For 45 years, I worked as a jeweler and metalsmith, trained by a master craftsman named Elias Whitfield Sr., who took me on as an apprentice when I was 19 years old with nothing but stubbornness and a willingness to learn. I built a career and eventually my own small workshop on the foundation he gave me: patience, precision, and a deep respect for the materials passing through my hands. I raised my son to understand the value of craftsmanship, though he passed before I ever got the chance to teach my grandson Michael the same lessons directly. I did what I could instead, in the years that followed, to pass down what mattered most, not just through words, but through the tools themselves, and the collection of stones I'd spent a lifetime carefully setting aside. I thought I understood exactly who those things were meant for one day, long into the future. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where this actually began, not in Elias's shop, not with a stranger's hands lifting a loop to examine tools that carried a legacy older than any of us fully understood. Let me start with a wedding decades ago and a promise I made without ever expecting to need to defend it. Michael married Sarah 12 years ago in a small backyard ceremony that neither of them could afford to make particularly elaborate. And I remember, with total clarity, deciding exactly what I wanted to give them as my gift. I'd spent 45 years by then building a reputation as a jeweler people trusted with their most significant, sentimental commissions, engagement rings, anniversary pieces, occasionally a piece of family history repurposed into something new for the next generation. But I'd never once, in all those years, made anything more carefully, more deliberately than the wedding set I built for Michael and Sarah. I used 2 stones from my own private collection, a pair of sapphires I'd been holding onto for over 20 years, waiting, without fully realizing it, for exactly the right occasion to finally set them into something meaningful. I spent 3 months on the design alone, working evenings in my garage workshop long after most reasonable men my age would have called it a night. I gave Michael the wedding band myself in private, the week before the ceremony. I remember his face when he opened the small box, the particular emotion of a young man realizing his grandfather had put more into a gift than money could ever account for. "Grandpa," he said, "I can't accept something this valuable. Let me at least pay you for the materials." "You'll insult me if you try," I told him. "This isn't about materials, Michael. This is about everything your grandmother and I built together, being passed forward into whatever you and Sarah are about to build." I never charged them a single dollar. I wanted that gift to carry something money couldn't complicate. Pure intention, nothing owed, nothing expected in return beyond the simple hope that they'd build a life worth the craftsmanship I'd poured into it. Sarah cried when Michael explained the history behind the rings, and for years afterward, whenever I visited, she'd catch my eye across a room and touch her ring gently, a small, private acknowledgement between us of what those pieces actually meant. I didn't know, standing in my workshop those 3 months building that wedding set, that the marriage itself wouldn't last as long as the rings would. I didn't know that Michael would eventually remarry someone who understood nothing about what those particular stones represented, someone who would come to see my entire life's collection not as inheritance, but as inventory. Michael and Sarah divorced 4 years ago, quietly and without the particular cruelty that sometimes accompanies these things. 2 people who had simply grown into different directions, still respectful of each other, still committed, above all else, to raising Lily well between 2 households. I want to be honest about how that divorce affected me personally, because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. I loved Sarah. Not instead of Michael, but alongside him. She'd become, over the years of their marriage, someone I genuinely considered family in her own right, someone who'd sat with me in my workshop more than once, asking careful, interested questions about the craft I'd spent my life mastering. I worried, when they separated, about losing that relationship entirely. I didn't. Sarah made sure of that, insisting, gently but firmly, that whatever happened between her and Michael, I would always remain Lily's grandfather, welcome in both households, part of her daughter's life regardless of how the marriage itself had ended. Michael met Vanessa about 1.5 years after the divorce, and they married a year after that. I want to be fair in describing her. She wasn't unkind, not overtly, not in any way that would have given me solid ground to object on. She was simply, from the very beginning, someone who seemed uncertain about where I fit into the family she was building with Michael, someone who'd grown up, I gathered eventually, in a household where blended families operated with clearer, harder boundaries than the ones Michael and Sarah had managed to maintain. My own health began declining around the same time, nothing dramatic, simply the ordinary erosion of age, hands less steady than they used to be, a knee that ached more often than it didn't. When my doctor suggested I shouldn't be living entirely alone anymore, Michael offered, without hesitation, to have me move in with him and Vanessa. I accepted gratefully, genuinely moved by the offer, not yet fully understanding how differently Vanessa might come to view that arrangement once the daily reality of it settled in around all three of us. I brought very little with me when I moved: my clothes, some books, and one wooden box I'd carried carefully in my own lap during the drive, unwilling to trust it to the moving truck with everything else. Inside that box was everything that actually mattered to me, everything I'd eventually, quietly, decided belonged to someone else entirely. The first year living with Michael and Vanessa was, for the most part, manageable. Vanessa was polite, if somewhat distant, and I told myself the adjustment simply needed time, a new household finding its rhythm around an addition none of us had fully anticipated when Michael and Vanessa first married. The narrowing happened slowly enough that I couldn't point to a single moment and say, that's when it started. It began with small things. Family dinners that used to include me shifted, gradually, into meals I'd eat alone in my room, Vanessa explaining, apologetically at first and then less so, that it was easier this way, with everyone's different schedules. Lily's visits, which had once meant long afternoons in my garage workshop, teaching her the basics of the craft the way my own mentor had once taught me, grew shorter and less frequent. Vanessa thinks it's better if Lily focuses on her schoolwork during her time here, Michael told me once, apologetically, though I noticed he never quite met my eyes when he said it. I didn't argue. I want to be honest about that. Some part of me had learned over a lifetime that dignity sometimes means accepting a diminished situation gracefully rather than fighting for territory that isn't fully yours to claim in someone else's household. But I noticed things. 45 years of careful, detailed work teaches you to notice things, even when you've decided, out of exhaustion or pride, not to say anything about what you're noticing. I noticed Vanessa's interest, subtle at first, in the wooden box I kept in the garage workshop, the collection of stones and tools I still occasionally worked with despite my hands' growing unsteadiness. She asked questions once or twice, framed casually. What were they worth? Had I ever considered insuring them properly? Wasn't it a shame such valuable things just sat unused most of the time? I answered honestly, without much thought, not yet understanding that each answer was being filed away for a purpose I hadn't yet imagined. It was Lily, eventually, who first told me something that made all those small, disconnected observations suddenly assemble themselves into a shape I recognized immediately as trouble. Before I go any further, let me pause here for a moment. If you're still with me, drop a comment below and let me know. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. It helps more than you'd think to know there are real people listening on the other end of this. A quick reminder, this story blends fictional elements into its storytelling, crafted for reflection as much as entertainment. If it isn't for you, this is a good place to step away. No hard feelings at all. But if you're staying, what Lily overheard is the part that changed everything. Lily came to visit on a Saturday afternoon, quieter than usual, and I could tell almost immediately the particular instinct you develop over decades of paying close attention to people, that something was sitting heavily on her 11-year-old shoulders. We sat together in my workshop, the same space where I'd once taught her the basics of setting a small, inexpensive stone, and after a while, without me pressing her, she finally spoke. "Grandpa," she said, "can I tell you something? I don't want to get in trouble." "You won't get in trouble with me, sweetheart," I told her. "You can tell me anything." "I was in the hallway last week, and Vanessa was on the phone," she said slowly, choosing her words with the particular careful precision of a child repeating something she understood was important without fully understanding why. She was talking to someone named Elias. She said she wanted to get your old tools and rocks looked at, because your hands aren't good enough to use them anymore anyway, and they're just sitting in the garage, not doing anything. I felt something go very still inside me. Did she say anything else? I asked, keeping my voice as gentle and steady as I could manage. She said something about selling them, Lily said, her small face troubled. I didn't understand all of it, but it made me feel weird, so I told Mom about it, and Mom said I should tell you too. I thanked her, carefully, for trusting me with something that clearly hadn't been easy for her to share, and I sat with her for a while longer, letting the conversation drift back toward easier subjects, though my mind had already begun working through the implications of what she'd just told me. Sarah called me that evening, confirming what Lily had described and adding her own careful concern. "Bernie," she said, "I don't want to overstep, but I thought you should know exactly what Lily heard, as precisely as she remembered it. It sounded deliberate, not casual." I thanked her, and after we hung up, I sat alone in my room for a long time, thinking not about anger, not yet, but about a decision I'd made years earlier, quietly, without telling anyone in this household, a decision that suddenly felt more important than it ever had before. I want to explain something about the decision I made years earlier, because it matters enormously for everything that happened next. Shortly after Lily was born, back when Michael and Sarah were still married, I sat with an attorney named David Okafor and quietly established a legal trust, a formal designation, notarized and properly filed, specifying that upon my death, or upon my voluntary decision to transfer ownership during my lifetime, the entire collection of tools, gemstones, and craftsmanship materials I'd accumulated over 45 years would pass directly to Lily, held in trust until she turned 21. I never told Michael about this arrangement. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was simple caution, the particular carefulness of a man who'd watched, over decades in the jewelry business, how family dynamics could shift unpredictably around inherited wealth, especially wealth tied to something as sentimentally loaded as craftsmanship passed down through generations. I wanted to protect the collection from ever becoming a source of family conflict, and I believed, at the time, that the cleanest way to do that was to make the decision quietly, formally and permanently, before anyone had the chance to develop competing expectations about it. I also, if I'm honest, made the decision partly out of hope, a hope that Lily, even as a newborn, represented the kind of continuity I wanted for the craft itself, a fourth generation carrying forward what Elias Whitfield Sr. had first given me, what I'd since built into something entirely my own. I called David the morning after Sarah's phone call, my hands slightly unsteady on the receiver, though not from age this time. "David," I said, "I need to confirm something. The trust we set up for Lily years ago, is it still fully in effect?" He checked, and confirmed within the hour that yes, the trust remained exactly as we'd established it, untouched by anything that had happened in the years since, including Michael's divorce and remarriage. Neither Michael nor Vanessa had any legal standing to sell or transfer any part of that collection. "Bernie," David said carefully, "has something happened that's making you ask about this now?" I told him what Lily had overheard, and I could hear him processing the implications through the silence on his end of the line. If someone attempts to sell property that's already legally designated to another beneficiary, he said slowly, that's a serious legal matter, regardless of family relationships. Do you want me to prepare documentation you can bring with you, in case this situation develops the way it sounds like it might? Yes, I said. I think I'm going to need it sooner rather than later. The appointment happened faster than I expected. Sarah called again 3 days later, having heard through Lily's ordinary weekend conversation that Vanessa had scheduled something for Saturday morning, taking Grandpa's old things to get looked at, as Lily had described it to her mother, still not fully understanding the significance of what she was witnessing unfold around her. I confronted the situation the only way I knew how to confront anything, carefully, deliberately, without rushing into an accusation before I'd gathered everything I needed to address it properly. I asked Michael, casually, over dinner that Thursday, whether he knew anything about an appointment involving my workshop collection. He looked genuinely confused, which told me, with some relief, whatever Vanessa was planning, she hadn't yet involved him in the decision. "An appointment?" he asked. "No, I don't know anything about that. Dad, is everything all right?" I didn't want to accuse Vanessa directly without proof. Not yet. Not until I understood the full shape of what was actually happening. "I think there might be some confusion about my old workshop things," I said carefully. "I'd like to come along to whatever this appointment is, if it does happen. Would that be all right?" Michael, still confused but sensing something worth taking seriously in my tone, agreed immediately and mentioned it to Vanessa that same evening. I watched her face when he brought it up, a flicker of surprise, quickly smoothed over into her usual pleasant composure. "Of course, Bernie should come," she said. "I just thought it might be easier for him not to have to worry about all the details. It's really just about getting things properly valued for insurance purposes." I didn't argue with that explanation. I simply nodded, thanked her for including me, and spent the rest of the week preparing quietly, carefully, for whatever Saturday actually turned out to be. I called David Okafor and asked him to prepare a formal copy of the trust documentation, portable, easy to produce if needed. I retrieved the wooden box from the garage workshop myself, checking, for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit, exactly what remained inside it: my mentor's tools, the small collection of stones I'd never fully catalogued for anyone but myself, and tucked carefully at the bottom, a folded document I hadn't looked at in years. Saturday morning arrived, and I got into the car with Michael and Vanessa, the wooden box resting carefully in my lap, uncertain exactly how the day would unfold, but certain, for the first time in longer than I'd been willing to admit, that I was finally prepared for whatever it turned out to be. The shop smelled the way jewelry workshops have always smelled to me: metal and polish and something faintly mineral, the particular scent that had defined most of my working life. Elias Whitfield Jr. greeted us warmly, professionally, clearly having no idea, at first, exactly whose collection he was about to examine. Vanessa had done the talking, describing the collection casually, pleasantly, as items belonging to my grandfather-in-law, who doesn't really use them anymore. I watched Elias lift the loop to examine the first tool, his expression shifting slowly from professional interest to the particular stillness I recognized immediately from decades of watching skilled craftsmen notice something significant. "There's a mark here," he said, examining the handle closely, a stylized W inside a small diamond shape. He looked up, and his eyes found mine, recognition arriving slowly across his features. "That mark belonged to my father's workshop," he said. "Every tool that left his bench carried it." He paused, studying me more carefully now. "I think you're going to need to tell me exactly how you came to be selling tools that came out of Elias Whitfield Sr.'s workshop 60 years ago." Vanessa's confident smile faltered. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do you two know each other?" "He was my apprentice," Elias said quietly, still looking at me. "Bernard Kessler. My father trained you, didn't he? I remember you from when I was a boy, working alongside him in that same shop." "I'm not selling anything, Elias," I said, my voice steady despite everything happening around me. I never agreed to this appointment as a sale. I came because I needed to make sure something important stayed exactly where it belongs. I opened the wooden box fully and removed the folded document from the bottom, the trust paperwork David had prepared, and set it on the counter between us. This collection was legally designated years ago, I said, to my great-granddaughter Lily, held in trust until she turns 21. Neither my grandson nor his wife has any legal authority to sell any part of it. Vanessa's face had gone pale, the confident composure she'd carried into the shop completely gone now. I didn't know, she said quietly. Bernie, I swear, I didn't know there was a trust. Michael never mentioned. Michael didn't know either, I said. I never told him. I made this decision privately, years ago, because I wanted to protect this collection from exactly the kind of situation we're standing in right now. Elias set the loop down carefully, his expression softening slightly as he looked between Vanessa and me. I think, he said, there are some family conversations that need to happen before anything else does in this shop. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, having received an urgent call from Elias's shop that Vanessa herself, shaken and unable to fully explain the situation over the phone, had asked to be made. I watched my grandson's face as Elias walked him through what had happened. The appointment, the collection, the trust documents sitting on the glass counter between us, evidence of a decision I'd made years earlier that none of them had known existed. You were going to sell Grandpa's workshop collection? Michael asked, turning to Vanessa, his voice carrying a disbelief that hadn't fully settled into anger yet. Without telling me? Without telling him first? Vanessa's composure finally broke completely, tears coming fast, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to find words adequate to the situation she created. I felt invisible in this family, she said, her voice raw. I know how that sounds, given everything. But Michael, ever since Bernie moved in, and with Lily around every other weekend, sometimes it feels like I'm just managing the household around everyone else's history. Everyone else's memories. I don't have a place in any of it that feels like mine. I thought it could contribute something, handle something important on my own. Maybe I'd finally feel like I actually belonged here, instead of just accommodating everyone else's family. I felt something complicated shift in my chest, listening to her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a kind of recognition I hadn't expected to feel. I understand feeling like an outsider in someone else's history, I said quietly. I've felt something like that myself more than once in this house. But Vanessa, the way you handle that feeling isn't by taking something that was never yours to take. It's by asking, honestly, to be included, instead of trying to prove your worth by controlling something that belonged to someone else's family long before you arrived. Michael sat down heavily on a stool near the counter, processing everything at once, his wife's confession, his grandfather's secret trust, the tangled, complicated feelings underneath both. I should have noticed you were struggling, he told Vanessa quietly. I got so used to managing the logistics of blending two families that I stopped checking in, whether you actually felt like part of one. Elias, standing quietly to the side throughout most of this, spoke gently into the pause that followed. For what it's worth, he said, I don't think anyone in this room is a villain. I think everyone's been carrying something they didn't know how to say out loud, until today made it impossible not to. Before I go on, let me pause here for a moment. If this story has reached you tonight, drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever watched someone try to prove they belonged in a family by taking control of something instead of simply asking to be included? I read every comment, and it means more than you'd think to hear from you. A gentle reminder, this story carries fictional elements, woven in for reflection as much as entertainment. If that isn't for you, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. But if you're staying, What happened after that shop is the part I still think about most. We didn't resolve everything that afternoon in Elias's shop, and I don't think any of us expected we would. Some things take longer than a single difficult conversation to fully repair. Michael and Vanessa began marriage counseling the following month, working through not just the appointment itself, but the deeper feelings of exclusion Vanessa had been carrying silently for longer than any of us had realized. I don't think she was wrong entirely about feeling like an outsider in a family shaped so heavily by history that predated her arrival. I think she was wrong about how she chose to address that feeling, and I believe, watching her these past months, that she's come to understand that difference herself. I set clearer boundaries after that day, gently but firmly. Regular family dinners that included everyone, workshop time with Lily that Vanessa could no longer quietly discourage, an honest conversation with Michael about exactly what the trust contained and why I'd established it the way I had, years earlier, out of a caution I now understood had been justified. Elias and I reconnected properly in the weeks that followed, our shared history reigniting an old friendship neither of us had expected to find again so late in life. He visits my workshop now most Sundays, and we work together sometimes, two old craftsmen trading techniques across 60 years of accumulated knowledge, exactly the kind of continuity I'd once hoped quietly my own collection might someday represent. Lily started spending real time in the workshop again, learning patiently, carefully, the same fundamentals Elias's father once taught me: how to hold a stone steady, how to see, really see, the material in front of you before deciding what it wanted to become. I think most days about the decision I made years ago to establish that trust quietly, without telling anyone. I'm grateful, now, that some part of me understood, even then, how important it was to protect something meaningful before I fully understood exactly why it might someday need protecting. I sit most Saturday afternoons in the garage workshop now, the same space where this entire story eventually unraveled and slowly began to heal itself. Lily sits across from me, 11 years old, her small hands learning the same patient precision Elias Whitfield Sr. once taught mine, 60 years ago, in a shop that smelled exactly the way this one does now. We hold a small sapphire together this afternoon, examining it under the same magnifying loupe I've used for 45 years, the same one my own mentor handed down to me the day he decided I'd finally earned the right to use it properly. "What do you see?" I ask her, the same question Elias Sr. once asked me. She studies the stone carefully, her small face serious with concentration. "I see where the light gets stuck," she says slowly, "and where it doesn't." I smile, feeling something settle warmly in my chest. That's exactly the answer a real craftsman gives, even at 11 years old, even without fully understanding yet how much that particular observation will matter for everything she eventually learns to do with her hands. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this: inheritance was never really about the material value of what gets passed down. It's about who understands, deeply and instinctively, what that thing actually represents, the years, the care, the quiet devotion poured into building something meant to outlast the person who built it. I'm not angry at Vanessa anymore, not the way I was standing in Elias's shop watching everything unravel. I understand, better now, how loneliness inside a family can make good people make difficult decisions for reasons that have very little to do with the thing they're actually reaching for. If you see any piece of yourself in this story tonight, if you've ever felt invisible in a family you desperately wanted to belong to, I hope you find the courage to ask honestly to be included, instead of trying to prove your worth by controlling something that was never yours to take. This is what a quiet revenge dad means to me. Not cruelty, not anger, just an old craftsman who protected something precious, quietly years before anyone understood exactly why it might someday need protecting, and who finally, patiently, found the right hands to pass it into. If this story reached you tonight, leave a comment and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story on this channel. Thank you for staying until the very end. A last gentle note. Some upcoming stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and life lessons. If that isn't for you, no hard feelings.